So here I have a pot that's leather hard. It's cool to the touch, which means that there's still moisture, but it's not changing color yet, and it's perfect to trim. So the first thing that I'm going to do in order to trim my bowl, and again we're going to be trimming all of our bowls, is take a little bit of mud, and I'm going to create a mud ring on my wheel head. And this is to help when I'm recentering my pot upside down. So I have a mud ring, and I'm going to draw a few lines in it. This helps my pot, and it also helps me find center. So turn my pot upside down. Oh, one important thing I almost forgot to mention. Visually inspect your bowl. Feel where it goes from a 1/4 inch thickness to where it becomes thicker. Mark it with your finger so that you know, yes, I can trim up the sidewall a little bit. And also, how thick is it on the bottom? Really be aware of your pot, and also what kind of curve do you have on the inside. If you have a nice curve on the inside, this can be curved on the bottom. Okay, now to check to see how close you are to being on center, I can hold my pin tool out, and it should mark it only in one spot. And if I stop it, I can move it away from that mark just a little bit. I can also hold my pin tool on the top side here and make a line. And I want it to be equidistant all the way around, same width. And I see that it's a little bit narrower right here than on this side, so I'm going to move it towards the narrow section. And it's always to your advantage just to spend a minute making sure that it's really nicely centered before you start trimming, and that prevents you from trimming through your pot just in one area. So, okay. Now I'm going to actually attach it to my wheel head. I want to have a coil of clay that's not too sticky, just clay that you'd like to throw with. And I have 2 pieces at once, and side opposite one another, push straight down to the wheel head. And this is another benefit of having the wheel head slightly wet from that mud, is that these little pieces stick to the wheel head. And again, 2 more pieces, side opposite, straight down. If this clay is too sticky, it'll stick to your rim. And also, don't push inward, just push straight down. You don't want to hurt your rim, and you don't want to actually stick this clay to your rim. You just want to stick your pot to the wheel. One thing I want to mention, so trimming, this is what we're going to be doing. Trimming is tooling. It's removing a lot of clay, a lot of excess weight from the bottom of your bowl. Clay that was necessary when you were throwing the bowl. You needed that extra support to prevent your bowl from falling down, especially if you were throwing thinly, but you don't need now. So trimming really changes the stance of the piece, and it also allows you to glaze inside the foot ring. So a benefit of trimming reduces weight, changes the whole form of your bowl, and it reduces the area of surface contact of your bowl with the table. So I can glaze this whole area. As I'm trimming, I like to use a bottle cap. So I'll use a water bottle cap. And it allows me to apply downward pressure on my bowl without fear of drilling through the base of my finger. And it also just allows me to have some bit of control over my pot as it's spinning. I'm not afraid of it flying off the wheel. So again, I always trim with 2 hands together. And in this case, I have my hand kind of working as a lever. I'm never just trimming with one hand. And as I'm trimming, it's good to trim at a pretty good pace. If you trim too slow, it's easy to kind of gouge into your pot and to knock it off center, to trim unevenly. So trim at a pretty good pace, and then you can apply less pressure. How do I know when I'm trimming and it's just the perfect consistency? See how it's coming off in long ribbons? That's perfect. That's how you know that your pot is just ready to trim. If those trimmings were sticking to my pot, I would know that my pot's a little bit too wet and that I should put it in front of the fan or perhaps work on another piece. If those trimmings were coming off and they were real dry and real tiny little pieces and my tool was going chattering, I would know that my pot was too dry. And in that case, I would probably also notice that parts of my pot were turning bone dry. They were getting a lighter color. And I would dip my pot in water or spritz it with water to rehydrate it. So the first thing I'm doing, I'm using my large loop tool, and I'm determining the diameter size of my foot ring. I'm just making a 45-degree angle cut inward. And I've made that mark on the sidewall so that I know that I can trim up the side of the pot just a little bit and it's not going to hurt anything. That's a good way to remove excess weight. Okay, so 45-degree angle cut in. And then what I'm doing is I'm indenting the top of the tool inward. And if you remember this from the cylinders, that little change of direction that I made at the bottom of the piece to stop the flow of the glaze, and it also is a visual indicator, just aesthetically. This is where the foot begins and this is where the body ends. So it's a formal decision as well as a functional one. I'm just indenting a little bit in. Okay, that's step one, is determining the foot ring size. Now I can look at the pot kind of upside down and say, oh, well, you know, the form's a little more elegant, not really. So I'm just going to take a little bit more off. You know, and this is all dependent on what your bowl is going to be used for. If it's a mixing bowl, something that needs to be sturdy and not rock around as you're applying pressure, maybe you want a little wider foot. If it's a bowl for more occasional use, maybe it has a narrower foot. So it really depends what you're going to be using it for. So I've just taken a little bit more off there. Okay, that's step one. Step two is to mark off a 1/4 inch thickness. So your foot ring is just like the wall of your pot. It's a 1/4 inch thick. And this is wobbling around a little bit, so I'm just going to add a little bit more clay. I'm going to have 6 lugs instead of 4, just to make sure it doesn't pop off. Okay. I do most of my trimming with this big loop tool, and I also like to trim a little on the wet side. That way, if I start to get thin, I'll feel the pot give and I won't trim through it. If you do a lot of trimming with your small loop tool, especially if I use this little narrow end, you can imagine it's really easy just to go through. It's easy to trim through and not feel it. So this is great for detail work, but really try to use your big loop tool for most jobs. The other thing you'll notice from using a small loop tool is that you leave all kinds of little lines, which certainly could be a decorative choice, but you may not want all the little lines. So if you want a smoother appearance, try to stick to the big loop tool. Remember, this bowl had a nice rounded bottom when I was looking at the top side, so it can have a nice rounded area inside of this foot ring. And I'm just holding this large tool on the flat side. And carving out this interior area. And again, I'm going to be glazing inside the foot ring, so the same little change of direction I made right here to stop the flow of the glaze and to make my job easier when I'm glazing, I'm doing the same little change of direction on the inside of this foot ring. Same little indent. And also, we don't want the flat edge on this foot ring. I'm going to taper it in both directions. So the same attention that I paid to the rim, I'm paying to the foot ring. I can stop and check it, I can tap. So as this gets thinner, the tone gets deeper. So it's like a drum. It becomes louder, it becomes deeper. If I love this bowl, I should take it off and check it. And if it's still too heavy, I can always just recenter it, put it back on. That's always a good advice, you know, rather than just to continue trimming and to hope for the best and not really know. The other thing I want to check, glaze is a dime thick. So I want to put a straight edge tool across my foot ring and see if it touches in the center to see if I have enough clearance for the glaze. And you see that I'm a little close in the center here, so I'm actually going to trim away a little bit more material. But I know that it's pretty thin in the center, so I'm not gonna take off much.